this time, I'll call the meeting of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
To welcome everyone here this evening, we have an agenda before us. On agenda item number 2, are there changes to that agenda? Dennis, I think you have a recommendation.
Yes, Your Honor. I would request that item number 16 be removed. It is not necessary to approve a transient merchant license on this particular item.
The council in agreement with that? Any other changes to the agenda? If not, we'll operate under that agenda. We'll move to agenda item number 3, which is to consider the approval of the minutes of the last regular council meeting that was held on August 8th. Council does have the minutes. Are there any corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim to approve the minutes as they have been presented. We'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 4 is the consent agenda. We'll bring the items up on the screen. On the consent agenda, they include consider the authorization to declare duty weapon as surplus property for the Marshall Police Department. Consider the authorization to declare police equipment as surplus property. Consider the authorization for out-of-state travel for Detective Jason Bicey, and consider the approval of the bills and the project payments. So is there any item on the consent agenda any member of the council wants removed for separate discussion?
I'd move to approve the consent agenda.
Motion by Steve, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. We'll move to agenda item number 9. Agenda item number 9 is consider the resolution that would authorize the bond sale and call for a public hearing on the modified redevelopment plan and TIF plan, which would be scheduled then for Tuesday, September 12th. So to introduce this, I'll call on Finance Director Carla Drown, and then you can also then introduce Terry.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight before us we have a couple of resolutions, and we have Terry Heaton from Springstead with us tonight, and she's going to discuss the 2017 bonds and the financing of them.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Whoops, that was a phone. I needed to look up details. I'll set that aside. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. This evening we have 2 items and 2 resolutions, but they are intertwined because in order to sell the bonds, the Tax Increment Financing District is a part of the financing source for that, and so that would also have to be approved in tandem. So that's why they're listed together. And so tonight what I thought I'd do is go through the recommendation for the issuance of the bonds first. And then the other item is to approve a public hearing on September 12th, as you mentioned, and talk a little bit about the tax increment financing component in more detail. And if you want me to just start with that?
Very good.
So the first item is the document that looks like this. That was just part of the agenda. And it asks the City Council to set the sale for $4,435,000 of general obligation bonds. And there are 3 components to it. First is a tax increment financing bond, and that is to finance the street reconstruction in the Commerce Industrial, or street bonds, for the Commerce Industrial Park in Michigan Road as part of the industrial park, and that part is related to the TIF. The second item is the street reconstruction project, that's for mill and overlay, and the third component is to refinance an outstanding bond issue for savings. We've combined them all into one bond issue because it's sizable, it'll get more attention in the market, and it'll save issuance costs by doing them all as one issue. They get a discount doing it under one umbrella. The The sale would occur on September 6th at 10:30 in the morning in our offices, and we would bring the results that afternoon for approval at the City Council meeting at 5:30 that day. The bonds would be rated by S&P again, and the portions of it, of the $4,435,000, $2.9 million is for the industrial park. The project actually costs $5.1 million, but $2 million of it will be paid by a deed grant, so you're not having to bond for that portion or use city funds. And also upfront funds from the MMU of about $307,000 are used. On the TIF portion of that, the repayment, the utility pays $500,000 a year towards projects such as these, and this one, and it was approved that they would do so. So in the first few years, you're getting $500,000, a couple of years of that, and then the remaining $267,000 to pay off their share of these bonds. So a chunk of it, $1,267,000 of debt service will be paid by the MMU. The TIF revenue generated, and we'll talk about a little bit about what the TIF is and how that's generated, would pay the remaining amount of the total debt service of $3.5 million. That's principal and interest. On the street reconstruction bond, the mill and overlay, that's a $360,000 portion. The City Council held a street reconstruction hearing on that, approved it unanimously, and so that part already has the authorization to move ahead. And the last item is a 2006C bond, and that we have projections. It's one of those that by itself probably wouldn't bring to you to go forward and get the savings just for that issue alone. It's a $1,145,000 bond issue, and it would save about $20,000 a year for the next 3-4 years. Present value of that's about $40,000. But as long as you're doing the other bond issue, to add in another column and grab the savings, the finance director thought that made sense. And so that was that is all packaged in here. So those are the components of the bond issue. Does anybody have any question on the bond issue itself?
Questions that the council has? Or I know the Ways and Means also reviewed this earlier at an earlier meeting.
Okay. Then I'll move into the component of the tax increment financing bond piece that would actually be repaid with tax increment. And this plan has been around many years. It's been modified. You have a project area, and within the project area there are several TIF districts. And what this plan is proposing is developing TIF District 1-14, which is one of many TIF districts within the project area that you've developed. I think we're down, I think we counted at the Ways and Means Committee. You don't have 14 districts. Many of them have gone away. You're down to about six now, prior to this one coming online. Well, just to talk a little bit about how TIF works, is that when a development is occurring in a community, you have an opportunity to bring in this case, a proposal from RELCO to look at a manufacturing type commercial industrial addition to the community. You have an opportunity to provide an incentive. And communities can do that, and developers look for that. They will look from community to community. Maybe things in Minnesota, maybe other states, they look for a community that's friendly to development, and they look for what does it cost them out of pocket, and what kinds of development tools can you use. And the range is, all over. There are many things you can do. In this case, Michaela Hewitt from our office worked with Cal Brink and the developer, and they felt that the property itself, along with bond counsel, qualified for a tax increment financing district. You've done abatement before, which is another economic development tool that's not as stringent, but this actually qualified for an 8-year tax increment financing district. And what that means is the incentive to the developer is there's a base value on the property that they're going to be in tax increment financing district 1-14 today, and what they're projecting is going to happen because of this development. The increased tax base is available to be captured. It's called an incremental tax, and for a number of years that tax can be captured, used to pay for a road or whatever it is that they needed to pay for that they didn't feel they could afford to do on their own. It pays for that, and when it's paid off, the tax increment district goes away, and not only the base value, but all the growth that came about now comes onto the tax base. So it's requiring you to invest on the front end, put in a road, a street, whatever it is that they need that's over and above their budget, that's preventing them from coming to your community, and then giving that as an incentive, and when it can get paid off, that tax base then can be levied against by the city, the county, the school district, and all the folks who are participating in the tax increment district. And in order to have TIF, there has to be a but-for test, meaning but for this incentive, there probably, the development wouldn't occur. So you're actually adding in tax base that wouldn't come probably if you didn't pay for this road. Now, we can't be, and then this came up in the Ways and Means Committee, can you ever be 100% assured that people are not going to come to your community? We can't. I can't tell you they wouldn't locate here anyway. But I can tell you that if you don't, then you run the risk of having them go somewhere else or someone else that might offer them the road or whatever else that they need to locate there. And that's certainly an option that the City Council could have as well. So this plan, and the other nice part about this plan is it's designed based on the increment that we're projecting will provide enough to pay for the piece that we need, the component of the bonds that will help finance the road. And it's conservatively estimated. It has, it's projecting more than we're actually plugging into the plan because, again, these are only estimates that we have, and we want to make sure that we're not putting the city at risk of having to pay for a lot of this or any kind of risk of having to levy for it. We're hoping the increment covers all of it. And so we purposefully put in some pretty conservative estimates, but we can't guarantee that all of this is going to happen anyway. And the nice part about putting a road in an industrial park is you're preparing the industrial park for development. And whether it is this particular developer or one that might knock on your door tomorrow or the day after that, you're building an industrial park that's available and ready and has the road in place that would allow people to develop in there and come. So it hopefully is this development. That's what the plan is based on. But you're not putting in a lot of things that are probably not going to be required for the next developer either. So that's what we're doing with this money. And again, it's an incentive. You collect this incremental tax that's a result of the development, use it for whatever improvement was required to get them here. When that is paid off, the district collapses, and now you've got this added tax base. And we're looking at $33 million as the estimate, a very conservative estimate. It doesn't include the equipment, it just includes the taxable portion. And then that, of course, will have appreciation over the years, so that by the end of the 8 years, the estimated value conservatively is about $39 million. So that's the market value estimate that you're bringing in through this investment. Does that make sense to everyone? It's a very quick overview. The plan has a lot of specifics in there. It outlines what you're paying for, the assumptions on what the development is, and it shows the annual increment that was then used, plugged into the bond, utilized to show that you could use that money to pay off part of the bonds. And so there's a lot of information. The plan is this is a very draft document, not very draft, it's a draft. We want a chance to go through, make sure everything is exactly the way it should be. And then the City Council would see this prior to the public hearing on September 12th and have a chance to comment on it before adopting it then. It would also be reviewed, the entity over or creating the TIF district and managing it is the HRA, so they would approve it, City Council would approve it, and then the following day the Planning Commission will also approve that this complies with the comprehensive plan before it would be implemented, and then the bonds would be sold after that on the 26th. So.
Thank you, Terry. That was a thorough explanation, so thank you very much. Questions for Terry, either on the issuance of the bonds or the modified redevelopment plan for the TIF project and district?
Did you say something at our prior meeting about the fact that maybe other financing would be available other than TIF for this project?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Bear-Kohler, the other item that could be done is abatement. It's another economic development tool that the city has utilized. As far as trying to shorten, it would take longer to pay it back. That could last 20 years. It would take more years to pay it back. On a TIF plan, you're capturing all the taxes that would be generated over and above the base. So it captures more, and the duration is only 8 years. And if you can collapse it sooner than that, then you can do it. Abatement is also available. TIF is harder because you got to prove that it qualifies as one of the types of the districts that are allowed. It's a redevelopment or a soil or an economic development, so it has to meet higher criteria to do so, but then you get a larger amount back every year to pay it off faster and save interest on the bonds, hopefully. You could use abatement, but in that case you would only capture the city's share, and so instead of being 116% of the tax capacity, it would drop down to the 50% range, and you'd probably have to spread back the repayment over the full 20 years instead of the 8 or 9 that you're able to by using TIF. But it is another option.
I was talking about abatement. Yeah.
And that's why I think that TIF is preferred over abatement, but it certainly could be a fallback position.
The difference is that with the tax increment financing, when in a sense we're making a gift to a business to come here, with the abatement we would not. They would be paying regular taxes then.
I want to clarify if I could, Mr. Mayor. They will pay taxes regardless.
But it's used to pay off the bonds. The money is used to pay off the bonds.
And in both cases, the abatement or the TIF would be used to pay the bonds. We would issue abatement bonds.
Right.
So in both cases, I think they're the same. I mean, it's the same. The developer pays taxes regardless, and they will pay at the 116% rate. It's just a matter of how those taxes are used. In a TIF, all 116% over and above the base gets put into this fund, and we can shorten up the bond term. So instead of paying for the 2.9, their portion of the $2.9 million over a longer period, it comes in faster because they get all of it, and so they pay off the bonds. In the case of abatement, they pay the full 116% of the combined taxes. The other parts are the entities the county and city can levy against it, and the 50%, the city's share of it, can be captured unless they agree, and that 50% means you'll be taking in, half as much money, and then we'd have to spread it out to probably a 20-year term. Same thing, they'd still be paying off $2.9 million of bonds, but they would be abatement bonds instead of TIF bonds. So it's you can bring in money faster. And the argument for using TIF also is that this is tax base that the city, the county, the school, everyone will be able to levy against once the TIF district is complete. So there is a good argument for doing it, but if you're uncomfortable and you feel like it's not going to be supported, or mostly it's because it doesn't qualify for a TIF, it doesn't meet one of the tests, then you would use abatement as usually the fallback. But otherwise, as far as who pays and how it's collected, it's exactly the same either way, and the amount of the bonds would be the same.
Other questions?
So can I clarify that TIF takes from the school district and the county for the first 8 years, where abatement would just use the city portion of the taxes for 20 years?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think we have to be careful about take, because...
Well, not take, but they cut it out for the public. That TIF takes all the property taxes for the first 8 years, where abatement just uses the city portion for 20 years.
It does. And the argument for using TIF is you have to hit a but-for test, so
Well,
the argument is without the road, they wouldn't come at all. So I think that's where would you take the taxes, or are these taxes that are coming because of what you've done, and you're capturing something that wouldn't be there otherwise? So, and I think that's what I'm.
It is. It's just to clear, because people have asked about that, and that's make it pretty clear.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? If not, we have the two resolutions before us. The first would be the resolution that would call for the public hearing on the modified redevelopment plan.
I move the resolution.
Motion by Craig.
I'll second.
Seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. And then the second resolution it would provide the issuance of the sale of the bonds. Questions on that resolution?
I'll move the resolution for the sale of bonds.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Thank you, Carla, and thank you, Terry, for your work on this. Agenda item number 10. Agenda item number 10 is the introduction and calling for a public hearing regarding the amendments to the taxi cab ordinance. Again, this was reviewed by, I believe, the Legislative Ordinance Committee either that committee, or Dennis, you have any comments you want to make? And again, the action is introduction.
Correct. Very brief comments. It was reviewed by L&O. Really no major substantive changes other than the proposal, the ordinance amendment would authorize the issuance of a city-issue decal tag, something that would be must be displayed on all of the taxi cabs placed in service. And the thinking is that, I mean, that would be some recognition that, yes, this is the official, licensed taxi cabs, and it might assist in enforcement a little bit more. And there's also discussion that through the city website or other public information, we could assist in, making sure people know which taxi cabs have been licensed by the city. So that was the only amendment that was proposed, and we're just requesting that public hearing be held on this matter. At the request of the L&O committee, I have provided a copy of this to the 3 licensed operators in town and have invited them. If they have any questions or want to meet with me, I'm available. I have not yet heard from any of them, and I also encourage them to be at the public hearing on the 12th.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I have one quick question. I was reading through this, and it says painted sign identification on their vehicles, and that just stuck out to me because nobody paints on vehicles anymore. So and I don't know if that's one of those that could somebody make that a sticking point, because it's all done by vinyl letters.
I've removed the word permanent, and so I'm thinking of something that would stick on, whether it's a magnetic sign.
I read the word painted, and somebody didn't come in here. Well, it's not painted on your vehicle. Nobody paints. You don't paint it on your. So I don't know if that should be something tweaked.
If that's another.
Yeah. I just don't want to have it come up
and that a logo, something is adhered to the. Yeah.
So I don't know if they come up in 6 months. Well, his isn't painted on. And I guess I can see it happening.
Take a look at that word.
I have a question about the license tag. It indicates that it will be put on the front passenger window, and then on the rear window. Is that to be visible outside the car or inside the car?
In my mind, I'm envisioning something like a state park pass that goes on your window, so it's visible from the outside, yes.
Before you get in.
Correct,
okay.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering what happens when they roll down the front window.
Oh, no, I'm thinking not on the passenger. I'm thinking on the windshield.
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 Oh, okay, because I thought it said the front passenger window. Okay. That's what it says.
Well, windshield.
You want windshield.
Passenger side.
You want the windshield, the passenger side of the windshield.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? If not, is there a motion to call for the public hearing?
I would move that.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 11, consider the resolution for the termination of the PrairieNet WAN Joint Powers Agreement. To present this, Scott Vandermillen, Community Services Director.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before you have a resolution to consider for termination of this joint powers agreement. As you saw in the background information, this resolution was formed back in 2003. Essentially, the agreement hasn't formed what was originally thought. The group had met on a yearly basis, relied on each other for technology resources and developing plans, etc. But now this group and the 4 entities believe that they can function as a informal user group. And Councilman DeCramer sits on that board, so I would rely on his experience and past background with that board for additional questions that I can't answer for you.
John, do you have any comments you want to make? Otherwise, one comment I would make is that, this group, this consortium, did some very good work early on and really kind of set the standards for the broadband that we have in this city, and that really is due to really the standards that were set by this group, and then also provided the connectivity between the different entities, so we eliminated the potential for duplication.
And really, I would say the group has served its purpose. It was originally formed as basically as a possibility of needing to actually have a communication or provider that would work with all the operations, the city, city utilities, school district, county at one point, and as it turned out, with providers coming in, setting up, this really was, like Scott said, this is not something that we had to go in that direction. The group itself has done and will continue to do a lot of things that are good for the city, the county, and the school, or really the city utilities and the school, and that we will be purchasing jointly some of the items. We go through this at our budgeting time. Really keeps our IT costs down to about a third of what it would be otherwise for each of the groups. We're not duplicating efforts. We're offering some redundancy and a few things. So that portion will continue, but what it won't be is a legal entity that's a joint powers. And when it comes right down to it, the reality of that is that that saves us about $1,000 a year. It's insurance that was involved in that. We're going to keep on with the function just under an informal user group. We're not required to have meetings as we would with the bylaws of a joint powers, and we're not required to carry an insurance, which really was never needed. So it's a kind of a couple things. It's served its purpose, and really no need for that added expense. So by terminating the joint powers and going right to a users group, we can accomplish the same thing.
Thank you, John. Any questions?
So with the new user group, there will not be an agreement or anything that goes with it?
Now there's agreements that go that we do for the budgeting, and you'll see that at budgeting time of what basically, like say the cost of servers and things, it's a third, since we share the equipment. But it's going to be handled a little bit more, I see, there's still going to be the agreements, just the formation of the group is going to be less formal.
What I'm wondering is if there will be an agreement, wouldn't it be, is the agreement going to be finished before December 31st when this expires?
The agreements are going to continue on. Those are going to go, and they're going to come to each of the organizations individually as they have to really approve the purchases and approve the budgets. But the group's going to meet, again, informally as far as where are things located, what type of equipment needs to be purchased, and really how does the nuts and bolts of the system that we have now with the city really operate. So.
And much of that has been covered in the partnership agreement between the utilities.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point too, that a lot of that's in the partnership agreement. So there is some formality to the expenses and the operation. It's the legal structure of the group that we're really changing, pulling away.
There's not going to be a new legal agreement being put together where all three parties sign?
No.
Okay.
Other questions?
What's the advantage to dissolving it? I mean, is there a cost? Is there a mandatory meetings with a report back to the Secretary of State? Or I mean, what's the advantage to dissolving and not leaving it as is?
The biggest thing is the $1,000 for the insurance.
And the requirement to meet once a year.
Yeah, we are required to meet once a year. And that's may still happen, but it isn't very, dictated as far as when and where and that kind of thing.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Scott. Thank you, John, for the explanation. You would entertain a motion on the resolution.
I'll make the motion to terminate the Prairie Net WAN Joint Powers Agreement.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 12. Oh, John, go ahead.
One thing I should have added, each of the three entities have to go
Yeah.
through this process, and MMU has already voted to discontinue the Prairie Net WAN Joint Powers. It's us, and I'm not sure where the school district is at, but that's part of the process.
They did that last night.
They did that
They did that
yeah.
last night. Okay, we're the last ones.
Yes.
And then that needs to be completed at least 3 months prior to the end of the year. So just now at the end of the year, will automatically just dissolve.
And Lyon County was late coming to the agreement. They signed it about a year later, but they also took the action at last month's meeting to
Okay.
terminate that as well. So all four entities have now acted.
Very good. Anything else? So agenda item number 12 is the reconvening of the Cable Commission. Scott?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Simply an informational item. The Cable Commission is a group that has not formally met since about early of April of 2011, and a lot of things have changed in terms of cable in the Marshall community. Just as an example, we're in the middle of negotiations, or the beginning stages, I should say, with both Charter and VAST to renew those agreements with those entities. And obviously with the development of PEG funds coming into the city to be dispersed among three parties, ourselves, SMSU, and the school district based on capital requests. I think there's value in reinstating that commission. We do have folks that are interested and willing to serve on that commission. So I bring it forward to you just as an informational that I'd like to see that commission reconvene so that we are transparent in terms of the financial decisions that we make with PEG dollars rather than just relying on myself and Alex Peterson. So with that, I'd take any questions from you.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Any questions?
What does the PEG stand for?
Public, educational, and governmental.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Scott. Oh, David?
If I may, Scott, you mentioned we have some community members who are interested in serving on the reconstituted board, and that's great. But I trust we're also going to be publicizing the appointment process through the usual channels so that there's a broad mix of the community that has a chance to hear about it.
It already has been.
How?
I believe those positions have been posted for 3 weeks, maybe?
Where?
Boards and commissions, just like we advertise for all of the boards and commissions.
That maybe is a larger discussion we want to pursue, but about where those get publicized, that's a once in a while recurring issue we have around here, not just for cable, but it does seem to me if that's happened before we've acted on it here, that's a little bit of a cart before the horse, which I don't think is quite right.
Mr. Sturrock, this is not an action item.
We never did sunset or eliminate the ordinance that established a cable commission. We just didn't have any applicants.
Yeah, I still have that concern. I think maybe we'll have more discussion on that later. Thank you.
So this commission last met in April of 2011.
As far back as I could find the meeting minutes.
Which is 6 years ago. Okay, and so we've operated without the commission for 6 years. So the question I have is, do we really need the commission if we've existed without it for 6 years and everything's been done? And I haven't heard any complaints about the way things are done. Maybe it's okay to downsize government and eliminate some commissions if we don't need them.
Absolutely. Totally agree. But as I stated earlier, Councilman Bayer-Kohler, if you're comfortable as a council member relying on myself and Alex Peterson to disperse PEG funds that come into the city between $50,000 and $65,000 a year, if you're comfortable with that, then I certainly support that. But what my intent here is so that we can be transparent in terms of the dollars that we bring in and how we spend those dollars, so there's other folks making those decisions rather than two city employees.
Scott, I think your point is good, and it's also we're all, as a city, we always promote active citizenship and people being involved in the public good. So,
and I think when we're spending money, it's good to be transparent. I think city government needs to be more transparent than it is now when it comes to spending money. And I applaud you for bringing that forward to be transparent.
With regard to this, the commission, is the commission more advisory?
It is.
I mean, or do they actually vote and they decide how the money is spent, or does staff and the city council decide how it's spent?
Yes, that's a good question. The commission plays an advisory role.
Right.
Yep.
So they're just giving advice on it.
Right.
And as far as the number and the transparency, other than the members of this, is it 5-member commission?
Yes.
Other than those 5 individuals, does anybody else know how the money is being spent?
Well, the council.
Right, and it would anyway. Even if there wasn't a commission, the council would know how the money is being spent.
Right.
So how much more transparency is there in having these 5 individuals involved? And I'm for transparency too. I'm just, sometimes government gets too big. We have too many commissions, too many boards. And if one hasn't been used for 6 years, I mean, do we really need it, is my question. And
I think the role, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but I think the role of the commission has certainly changed since April of 2011. PEG dollars weren't available to the city back in April of 2011.
Any other input? If not, thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Agenda item number 13. Agenda item number 13 is to consider the resolution authorizing the application for a contract with the state of Minnesota for the Regional Hazardous Materials Chemical Assessment Team. Rob?
Hi, Mayor and Council. With me is Devin Borchak, who's Environmental Health and Safety Manager for Schwann's and a member and one of the leaders of our team. One of the people that didn't go to Nebraska for the eclipse, so he's here to work. So he's
got to almost eat here.
Able to join us, but I think it's self-explanatory, but it's basically just to request an RFP for the continuation of the chemical assessment team that serves Marshall and Southwest and West Central Minnesota. It's funded by the state through hazmat funds, hazmat waste funds, and some grants, and it's opportunity to have this group sort of a specialty for our region to assist fire personnel for responses that we have. So,
thank you, Rob. Questions for Rob? If not, is there a motion to authorize the application?
I so move. Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 14. Agenda item number 14, consideration of the temporary extension of the alcohol license for Brow Brothers Brewing Company, 1010 East Southview Drive for the Hop Fest, September 8th and 9th, 2017. Are there questions on this? If not, is there a motion?
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 15. Agenda item number 15, consider the acknowledgement of the application for the exempt permit for Prairie Home Hospice. Again, are there any questions on this? If not, is there a motion?
Move. Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 16 was removed from the agenda, so we'll move to agenda item number 17. Agenda item number 17, consider the application for a temporary on-sale intoxicating liquor license for Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce for October 13, 2017. This event's at Southwest Minnesota State University. Are there questions? Is there a motion?
So move. Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 18. Agenda item number 18, consider the application for a temporary on-sale intoxicating liquor license for Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce for this event, October 30th, 2017 at SMSU. Questions?
Move approval.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? We'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 19. Commission Board Liaison Reports. Mine have not met since we last met. Craig?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Steve?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor. I was not present for the EDA. I had to go visit a college with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
I know, senior.
Glenn?
The Public Housing Commission is still working on their non-smoking policy. That's pretty much it.
John?
Okay, EDA, start out with the one. The EDA did meet, approve the strategic plan in the meeting, and moving forward, we did have a discussion as well on a small cities grant, and wanting to move forward with an application on that. When that comes around, there will be a chance to, because of the nature of some of the information, we'll have some discussions with the city council, various city council members, or all the city council members wanting to go through and get some specifics on the actual application as far as what's all involved in on that. Other items, I got three things here, but one other item is we did have our first meeting of the municipal building, or the reconvening of that group with several new members, and we had a chance to take a tour of the building, go through some of basically the past history, bring everybody hopefully up to date enough to know what we're going to be talking about, and we've got a meeting scheduled for the first week in September. Last item I have is in regards to MMU. We've had discussions in the past regarding the sodium chloride levels that are in our effluent water and what's coming out of our wastewater treatment facility, and how that most economically can be curtailed through changes with the water treatment facility, basically the fresh water coming in. MMU put in for two different grants. One was basically in regards to water improvement, and the second was through MPCA project. The first one, they had a call for both regarding their status. The first one with the regarding water quality, since there really is not a need from the MMU's aspect or from either Department of Health or whatever to improve the quality of the water. It is hard water, but we've got good quality water that's coming out of MMU. So that portion of the grant, they figured, was unlikely to be awarded. The other one, however, MPCA, they had a discussion on that. This would be for a $7 million grant to do the water treatment facility. They did have a call-in and question and answer session on that. And the information they got out of there was that Marshall has been scored a score of 68 on the grant. Now, last year, anyone with a score of 56 or higher was awarded the grant. So there's no guarantees, but at this point, it is a strong possibility that we would be awarded the $7 million grant to revamp our system and increase the lime softening and the addition of the potash softening to bring the water down from its, originally it's at about 70 grains of hardness. Now the water treatment facility is down to about 35. This final treatment would not make it zero, but it would bring it down to approximately in the 5 to 8 grains of hardness range. That is intended to not have the primarily residents, which according to the studies, about 70% of the chlorides that are being released into the Redwood River come from residential water softeners. So the intent is to bring it down to the point where residential water softeners could either be removed if they so choose and stay with the 5 to 8 grains of hardness, or at least be dialed back considerably so that the amount of salt that's used is tremendously reduced. It's at this point that really it comes back to start thinking about from the city council, because in order to do that there are some criteria. There's 8 points that a while back we had a study that went on as far as what needs to be done in order to do this, and there's a series of progressions that we had to take in order to bring those chloride levels down to the point where they need to be. We can't do that without drastically reducing the amount of salt that comes from water softeners. At this point, I believe the number is about 11,000 pounds of salt that go to the river on a weekly basis for Marshall, and we've got to bring that down. That's going to take some action by the city council. You're going to have a much better, much more detailed presentation, assuming that at the end of this month, if we get the grant awarded, Brad Rose will be here, or somebody will be here to go through and give us a very detailed explanation of what's going on, the effects of what's it going to cost, various things. But we're essentially looking at a $9 million project of improving the water treatment facility, of which we would have a $7 million grant to kick us off. But there's always buts. But there's actions that the city council would need to take. I would suggest that, assuming you still have those reports and available, take a look at it before probably September 12th. We should know by the end of this month if we get the grant or not. And we're assuming we get the grant, we're going to have to hit the ground running. There's a lot of things that have to happen, and this needs to be completed by 2019. So things are going to be moving right along with that. MMU has already taken some action to move forward and get in anticipation of hoping to get that grant, but there's a lot that can't be done until we actually have the word that we've got it. So I would encourage you to find those reports, get a hold of either myself or Glenn or somebody from MMU if you don't have it available. We'll get you those reports, read through it, and get an understanding of those conditions. The worst case situation, and stress worst case situation, is if all of these actions, we do this, we spend the $9 million, we still are not meeting the criteria for the water leaving their treatment facility, we would have to probably put in an ordinance that says you do not use a water softener at Marshall. That's the absolute worst end. There's a lot of things we can do before that, and the feeling is we should be able to meet our standards well before we get to that point, but we take this grant, we move forward, we must meet our discharge levels. And that's a part of the requirement of doing that. So we would need to take the steps, and again, the absolute worst case step is to have an ordinance against the use of water softeners.
Just to clarify, that would be a requirement of the grant, but it's also a requirement of our wastewater permit too.
Right. So I'm probably taking about enough time on that to get you started on that, start thinking about it, start reading up on it, and we will be getting a much more detailed presentation by MMU, hopefully in the near future. If we don't get the grant, okay, we don't. We move on, we wait for next year or whatever. But at this point, with a scoring of 68, looks very promising. So we need to be ready to move if we do get the word and say that we're moving. So that we get it. And with that, that's mine.
Thank you, John. Any questions for John? Thank you. David?
None of my boards have met.
And Jim? So we'll move then to agenda item number 20. Council member individual items. Jim, let's start on your end.
The only thing I have tonight is Sounds of Summer went off very well. I was down there on Saturday night, and it was a very enjoyable evening. And I want to compliment our police force. They did a good job. And the incident, I don't know what officers it was, but you don't hear a lot of good things. But I was about 20 feet away from these two gentlemen who decided to get a little rambunctious. And our police force, give Rob credit in the police force, they went in there, intervened, calmed both gentlemen down. Both of them got to stay the rest of the night, and they just did a wonderful job. And I just want to compliment them on the job that they did that evening and the event that went off that evening.
Very good. David?
Earlier this month, I was at the annual summer conference of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and a lot of good, useful information. Our neighbor, Mayor Smigalowski from Granite Falls, is the new president this year, so I think that's a good thing for our region, and look forward to hear what agenda they are developing for the next legislative session.
John? Just one thing that I have noticed a little bit more so lately, that kind of a long-term in our planning, we've talked about, there's been a lot more bike traffic out along 59 heading out to Industrial Park, both morning and evening, as workers are starting to use, or the workers out there using a little bit more of the bikes. So maybe it's time for us to start thinking about how to do a safer trail for them, some means of either marking or whatever. But right now they have to pedal down Highway 59, and of course probably the worst spot is trying to cross the bridge about the time you get a semi or something going through. So just keep that in mind as we start planning out in there. Maybe we can put some trails out through there.
Yeah, that southbound is the worst when they're coming back, because there's the Channel Parkway interface and the bridge and all the choke point there. It is pretty risky, and there's a lot.
The date is changing, but I know next month both Glenn and I will be at the Area Transportation Partnership, which is probably the most likely source of the funding that could do that. That was the source of funding that did along Highway 23 from the intersection back to Independent Lumber. So we can start that discussion with them. So good point. Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I only have a couple items. One is it relates directly to the bike trails again, and with the completion through the fairgrounds area and past my office, not only do I see a lot of traffic, but a lot of people use the parking lot there across from the Public Works Environmental Office to go onto the trail and come off the trail. So I've had a number of opportunities to talk to people coming off the trail, and I say, hey, you know, how you doing? It's what do you think of the trail? And it has been extremely positive. I'm absolutely amazed at the amount of traffic that goes through there during the week. I can only imagine what it looks like on the weekends. And I have gotten a lot of really good feedback. There are a couple of negative things, and I know that they've talked to Glenn and Preston, and that's all good. And you know, I just want to make sure when they do that, that they call City Hall and express that and say it there first. But most of the people that I've talked to out there that use the parking lot are coming from more than 20 miles away. So we have people putting their bikes on the racks or loading them in the back of the van, hauling them there to go on the trailhead, and they usually, excuse me, it seems like the majority of them ride up to Lind or to the state park, back, and then they go into town. And they also enjoy the community through the bike trail. So it's really encouraging and very impressive. So my hat's off there. And then again, I just want to go back off and thank the Public Works and the Street Department for their attention to a lot of the detail about keeping things clean, and then the cooperation with the fair, and especially this year with the traveling memorial, and really making sure that we had a clean doorstep there. I wasn't able to visit the memorial here when it was here. We were in Texas. But my wife and I got up early Sunday morning and drove to the Douglas County Fairgrounds in Alexandria to visit it there. And after we went through the memorial and talked to the firefighters, I talked to the truck driver and his daughter for a good period of time. And I asked him, you know, Marshall treat you okay? And Marshall treated him more than okay. And I don't want to say anything bad about Douglas County, but this community left a lasting positive memory with those folks, and I think we should be proud of that.
Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you.
Thank
you. Going back to the bike trail, Glenn, I think you're probably anxious to give a report on the railroad crossing, but I would echo, and Steve, I know you've been on a lot of trails. This is probably one of the nicest in the state. Not the longest, but it's probably one of the more interesting ones in the state.
If I can step back too. So now, to add to the extension, the most recent couple that I talked to said, well, now we need to connect it to Tracy in the old rail bed. Past Lake Marshall. Now, I know some of that's probably private. So Glenn, when your spare time, I want you to do a virtual path proposal on that, okay? You'll have it in a month or so? Yeah. Okay, good, so. Thanks.
So Steve?
I have nothing.
And Glenn?
I have nothing.
Again, echoing Jim's comments about Sounds of Summer. First off, Saturday was perfect weather, and lots of good organization went into it, not only by city staff, but lots of volunteers. So it was a very successful weekend. So good crowds, you know, with the exception of the weather challenge that we had on Friday night, everything went perfect. So we'll move on then to agenda item number 21. Staff reports, Sheila.
After this evening's work session, the next budget work session was scheduled for September 19th. I just want to let the council know that there were scheduling conflicts with that particular date, so we are trying to reschedule that for either September 20th or 21st. So I know Kathy sent out a doodle. If we could get some replies to that, that would be wonderful, so we can get that back on the calendar.
So here's the, and thanks for bringing that up. Here's the scheduling conflict. I'm in Crookston that evening, but, you know, as we know from a couple weeks ago, the meeting can go on without me. That is the evening for the outside presentations and I think special revenue. So if an alternate day works perfectly for everybody, that's fine. Otherwise, I would suggest go with that September 19th date, and David, you'll have to chair that meeting. So people would respond to her doodle poll, and then we'll take it from there. Is that okay? Any comments on that?
Okay. And then just an update, tomorrow the city administrator position closes the posting. As of last Friday, I know Gary Wires sent out a notice to each of you. There were 15 applicants for the position. We expect that there are more at the closing tomorrow. Gary will conduct the initial screening of those applicants and then select the top 10 or so to move forward into the hiring process. Those semifinalists will be brought to the council for your review on September 12th, where you will select the finalists for the position. At that September 12th meeting as well, Gary will also review your wishes on the interview dates and how you wish that day, those 2 days to proceed.
And just if I could,
sure.
I feel like I'm jumping in here on your report too much, but just to jump in there, I know, Kathy, you sent out kind of a save the date for 2 days. We're obviously not going to use those 2 full days, but that was more of just kind of a save the date. So if you follow the pattern that we most recently followed, that Monday there would be a lunch. Monday evening there would be a kind of a community meet and greet the candidates. And then Tuesday would be the day that would be fully occupied with the interviews and tours and that type of thing. So it probably will take 1 full day of the council members' time.
Okay, and then one final thing, just a reminder that on August 30th, the council is invited to the retirement celebration for Joe Krogman. He's been our detective with our police department for over 30 years. So his reception is from 4 to 5:30 at the Law Enforcement Center.
Any questions for Sheila? Thank you, Sheila. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll just touch base a little bit on the bike path project as we look for it to be completed. The railroad is here doing their work both on the bike path crossing, Highway 19, Legion Field Road, and there's some rumor they may do something with Fairview Crossing. So they are here. There'll be detours set up periodically, but my understanding is they'll be cutting the rail and replacing the rail at a higher elevation. And so we won't hear the train coming through maybe for at least during that time. Okay, so that's going on. As soon as that's complete, I know there are some other amenities that still need to be done with respect to the kiosks or things like that, but we have had some negative comments about, first of all, we put the barricades up to keep people off the tracks when we were still working there, and then they moved the barricades off to the side when they'd come through, and then we had to fence it off, and that was a requirement of MnDOT safety. So it's just one of those things where we have to deal with it for a period of time, but we're almost done. I do agree with the statement of, it really is a fine facility to go on for. It's not just bikes. There's a lot of baby carriages on that trail as well. So I think you'll see that being completed shortly. Maybe a comment.
Scott, the kiosks are done now, right?
Yeah, all 10 are installed.
And it's just then the information on them?
I think that's
that needs to still be provided?
I think that's on.
Yep.
Okay. Maybe a comment on our Highway 59 project, which is really our MMU project for water main replacement. It looks like Christmas tree in the boulevard on the east side of the street. And that's all the utilities that have been located. The issue, if you haven't been up to speed yet, is that there's a fiber that's located there that's not locatable. And they just came in again and tried to locate it, and they couldn't locate it. And so they have a boring machine that's going to put in a new line that's locatable, but they can't cut over the existing line to the new line until it's approved through 911, because it's a 911 fiber. So the contractor that we've got working there can't work there until that's done, that cutover's been done, and it's going to be early September before they make that cutover. And I'll say probably the second week in September by the time it's done. So the contractors had to move on to a different project in Granite Falls, and will take at least 2 weeks to do that project, weather permitting. So there's nothing we can do about it. It's going to be the way it is. We can't go in there and put that main in without all of that being done, and to keep that 911 fiber operational. So that's, if you've seen stuff going on or not seen stuff going on with all the flags, that's what it is. MnDOT is working on the project from here to Vesta, and all that material comes from this plant. And so we have improved North 7th Street as much as we can. We left it down a couple inches. They're going to be hauling all of their material out of the plant to that road. We'll do an inspection of the roadway and then put the final lift of asphalt on. So it's down a little bit. You can see we've had some significant rainfall in the last 2 weeks. I've had over 7 inches of rainfall. And when we say weather permitting on projects, this is the weather unpermitting that really kind of shuts things down for a while. The Independence Park project is on hold until that can firm up a little bit before the contractor comes in to do drainage. They're pumping water on North 7th Street right now, and it's on the roadway because the roadway is 2 inches below the curb and gutter. So it's just a process that we have to do to get rid of that extra water. So, weather permitting, we'll be continuing with our projects starting mid-September.
Just one additional comment on the, you may want to comment on this too, or Rob may, with, last Wednesday night, we received anywhere from 3 inches to 5+ inches, depending on what neighborhood. And 25 years ago, that would have been a state of emergency. We would have had street flooding, we would have had sanitary sewer backups and failures in the wastewater. So kind of a testimony to the infrastructure improvements that we've made over the past 25 years for flood control and for the improvement of our kind of keeping our sanitary sewer system away from our storm sewer system. So.
Really has made a huge difference. The Tiger Lake project that we did, we would have automatically been closing off Saratoga Street and James and all the Shepherd, those areas adjacent to that pond, where it did go into the additional area for backup. We had 1 pump out of the 4 operational, and one of the people who knows water gave us a call and said, how come it's not being detained for a very long period of time? And we said, we only had 1 pump going the whole time. We operate those pumps. Our power supply for those pumps is on a demand basis. So as soon as an additional pump kicks on, you pay for that overtime for the next year, for that demand charge, for that second pump. So we are very careful at what those stage elevations are for that pump station, understanding that we don't want flooding in the streets or in basements. We did have an impact still at the wastewater plant because of, we still have infiltration. We just have way less than there used to be. Some pumps are running all over town. Double sump pumps are running in certain neighborhoods. So, but we had over 7 inches of rain at my place.
Yeah. Just to add on to that, Glenn, to what you said about, the city has worked diligently and I think very effectively to take care of our plumbing, the sanitary and the storm sewer. But think about the fact that, especially in my neighborhood where the houses were built in 1915 through 1930, most of those are Orangeburg pipe, which is just loose laid, butted joints. So they're effectively a drain tile that happens to carry sanitary waste. And if you think about the linear footage, my lot is 66 feet wide. My bet is that I've got almost 60 feet from the house to where it goes to sealed PVC pipe. every house has that. So for all the linear footage of city sanitary, we have private that are still draining that we don't have the ability to fix other than on an as-needed basis. So to say that we still have I&I infiltration and inflow, the infiltration is that buried tile line taking water out of the ground, and that's going to take a long time to go away because those are going to be replacements or mitigation of individual sewer lines.
One of our major places has been the industrial park at Hahn and County Road 33. That we had significant flooding, 1.5 feet deep, but we are in the process of developing a project for that area, both for the streets and for the storm sewer abatement there for problems. So we do identify those areas that we have significant regular problems, but it's really reduced from what it used to be.
And I will say that last Wednesday night when we got that first 4.5, 5 inches of rain, I came back from Duluth, got back into town at 9:15, and I drove through the monsoon from about Paynesville into Marshall, and it lightened up just about at Green Valley. It was a little bit lighter in Marshall, but I came across 33 and down closed 7, North 7th. And there was a little bit of water, but not bad. I wasn't driving down the center of the street. And then when I got to the intersection of West Marshall Street and 7th Street, that used to be one of the flood areas in the heavy rain. I remember that house on the corner of Van Meverin's actually in 93, the water was hitting the floor joists for the main floor, and there was no puddle there. So I think that's a real tribute to what's been done.
That's all I have.
Any other questions for Glenn?
Well, I was just going to reiterate what you said, Bob. As somebody who lived through a rainstorm and sewer backup, it is very important that we keep that infrastructure up.
Yeah.
I do know you were the mayor at the time because I called you and chewed you out. So,
I don't remember that.
I do. But, it is very important that we keep that up because that is something that it hurts the values of your homes and it hurts the image of your city.
Yeah.
When we have whole neighborhoods flooded with sewage. And my wife actually commented during that rainstorm, we don't have to take anything out of her basement. She still remembers us trying to throw stuff up the stairs so it didn't get flooded.
Yeah.
And it wasn't water that was coming in.
Okay. Anything else for Glenn? Dennis?
Thank you, Mayor. Just kind of following up on what Councilmember DeKramer said, I've had some meetings with Brad Rose on this sodium chloride reduction matter. The resolution is being drafted. We'll try to get that out so you have a chance to look at it. We're hoping to be able to come to the September 12 meeting. And I know $9 million is a big price tag, but it's cheaper to pre-treat the water at the treatment plant. I know that I talked to Bob Van Moore also, and the city had retained Bolton and Mink as council, and I believe that they are saying if you have to put on the post-treatment, treated at the treatment plant, that may be $129 million tag. So, and the MPCA has issued a 2024 deadline. We have to be at that sodium chloride level. Then it has to have serious reduction. So the sooner we get at it, the better. So hopefully we'll get some positive news within the next week or two from the grant folks. And I know it's $7 million or 80% of the actual bid. And so I think we're still looking at that $9.3 million at the high end. Hopefully we can get a bid a little lower than that. So, but it's still 80%. So even at that 9.3 million, 7 million is still less than the 80%. So we're, I think Brad was surprised that they were on the consideration list for some funding assistance. So
added one more thing in there. This talk about it is an all or nothing. You get 7 million or the 80% or nothing. It isn't like, okay, we'll fund you by 3 million or 5 million. If we get approved, it's the 7 million or 80%. So.
And then I know, like you said, there are some tight timelines. Once you get that approval, then you have to have the plans and specs in short order for
really tight.
Yeah, 2018 construction, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Anything else, Dennis? Agenda item number 24 then is the pending agenda items. We'll move then to agenda item number 25, the information items, including the building permits. And the upcoming meetings as agenda item number 26, which brings us to agenda item number 27 to consider adjourning this meeting.
So move.
Second.
Motion by David, seconded by Jim. Discussion? Now we'll move to a vote. That motion does pass. We will reconvene in 5 minutes in a budget work session.
Make sure the button works.